Welcome to the show. I'm Olivia Nunn, and this is where we rise, rebuild, and remember that storms don't break us, they reveal us. Let's get into it, and I'm here with my very good friend, Tim Martin, who is currently the Chief Strategy and Contracting Officer for CLVG Consulting. He is a Army, or no, actually not Army, Marine Corps. I think I'm just wanting everybody to be Army, but a Marine Corps family member. Your roots run deep in serving in the military community. So let's get into your story of your rock bottom moments and why giving back is so important.
I appreciate that, and thank you for having me, Olivia. I have followed your path from when you were still in uniform to the greatness you are doing now in both of your podcasts, as well as what you're doing in the community. So I appreciate you for having me.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. So, we talk about rock bottom moments, and for some, rock bottom moments can be life-changing in the way that it can take them out. And when I mean take them out, as in they just stay there, they're stagnant. Or tragically for some, they don't ever leave there and they end up leaving us from this earth. For others, they learn how to take those moments, because we know that you're always, more than likely, it's not just one rock bottom moment. You're probably going to find yourself at a few. You learn how to rise above it. You gain wisdom and clarity and hopefully an arsenal of tools to help you get through that. So for you, where were your moments and how were you able to kind of grow from those experiences?
So the moment that comes to mind the most, especially as we're talking about my path forward and what I'm doing outside of the work at CLVG Consulting, is it was a unhealthy, nasty divorce. Many of us sadly have gone through that process in our lives. Some are neat and pretty, and some are not. And in doing so, for me, it caused, it was during the time of COVID. So not only was it drastically drawn out because of COVID, with the court systems closed and all that, it also was not an easy one. It was one that involved multiple visits with a forensic psychologist for both parties, and also had my two kids involved, who at the time were younger, and were still trying to figure out what was going on in their lives and how things were changing. And in doing so, there's a lot of those moments over that period of time that has really caused me to reflect. One of the things I talk about is about 6 months into the divorce process, which was, again, about 3 years of a process. I was looking in the mirror, and what I saw was not the positive feeling, let's put 2 feet on the ground and have a successful day. I saw the broken parts. I saw the, at the time, I had a full beard. I actually still had hair, but, I shaved it off. I felt like I was a lot older. I felt weathered. Everything I looked at just made me feel very broken. I shaved, so what, I'll shave it all off. I'll shave the face and I'll feel better. And, it didn't change anything. And it was that deep pain of things which were, things that were said and, by, friends and exes, and seeing the struggle on my children's faces through a divorce which wasn't healthy and wasn't good. And that was the biggest challenge is, within that period of time, there were different events that happened which continued to break me down further. And there were several moments that, those severe nightmares, come through, where you wake up, you're drenched in sweat, and you're trying to get yourself emotionally centered, but you just can't. You keep going down that path of that nightmare, and it took a phone call to my friend, what I call my octopus, or somebody calls their battle buddy, to help. At 1 a.m. in the morning, calling, saying, in tears, and having that help to kind of emotionally recenter some, to give those reminders, hey, you still matter, you're doing good as a father, you're doing good as a human, because you start having that self-doubt that what you're doing in this world as a father, as a parent, as a son, and as a partner in relationships, and as friends, you start going, maybe I'm not all of this, you know, that people say I am. And you start having that self doubt, and it truly, starts eating you alive.
You know, divorce is not easy. I know that you had mentioned a moment ago that some can make it out well, but for the most part, even if you do, divorce is not easy. And nobody leaves divorce unscathed. It is a life altering because you literally are ripping apart two people and the lives that they have shared and created. And then if you have children, if you have a business, you know, it is so hard to untangle that. And I'm not just talking about bank accounts, right?
Yes.
Like, I mean,
No.
yes, that is, by the way, that is a pain in the butt,
Oh, yep. Yep.
but it is untangling every facet of your life. And you don't really understand the nuances of how much your life is intertwined until you have to go through and start ripping it apart. And that's painful. That is truly painful. And I think as a parent, it's increasingly hard when you're going through that and you have kids and you see the pain that your kids are going through because they don't quite understand, why is mommy and daddy not together? Why is what we know the norm or what was normal no longer normal? And that is incredibly painful.
It is, and the other part of that, and you talk about the faces of the pains, is one of my continuing nightmares is faces, and they're faces of my children during periods of time during that where you saw that anger or that fear or that disappointment, and as well as faces of others, but you have those faces that kind of haunt you during those really dark moments. And when you're talking to children, a lot of times, for me, my oldest, and rightfully so, I don't blame her. First words were, why did you do this? Why did you file? It was, daddy's fault for this process. And those were okay emotions to have. When you look at it from a logical standpoint, which, you understand where your child's coming from, you understand where somebody's coming from when they say that, but then you have the other side of ourselves, which are the emotional side that, those words cut deep, even though you can logically understand where they're coming from. And you have that conversation to explain, why the divorce is happening or why something is happening. And throughout that process, one of the things which occurred, which it happens is, and it's kind of what Genesis, my future project, and what kind of brought us here today, of that rebuild is, I carried a challenge coin on me by Jason Redman that said "Get off the X," and happened to get it when I bought his book, and I carried it with me because it reminded me to kind of move forward, even when I had those weaker moments to. And one day, knock came at the door, and it was the local police department, to investigate things going on, and that really stuck deep, and that fear that was I not a good partner, was I not this, and when you're on the opposite side of being questioned about what you may or may not have done, it really cuts deep, a lot deeper than that I'm still battling today.
I think that it's going to be a long road. And I know people don't want to hear that, but grief and the journey and forgiveness and learning to love again is a lifetime. It is a lifetime journey, and healing is continual. It's healing for yourself. It's healing for the life that you once had. It's healing in accepting what your life is going to be. Forgiveness for yourself and the partner that you once had and the life that you once had. And then the growth in figuring you out in this process.
The one thing which, when we talk about trauma, not outside, not just with divorce, but trauma, PTSD, is the way I've started to explain it to someone is, those are the scars that are inside that you don't see. But if you break your leg, from exercising, or when we were children, and as a there's been many times I've climbed trees and climbed top of houses, and you fall, you scrape. Is those physical scars are still there, and if you by chance break a bone, it heals. But I promise you that when the pressure drops in the weather, you're going to feel where that heel was. Even though the bone has healed, you're going to feel that pain still, because obviously, even though the body has reformed itself, become stronger, the scars are still there. And, with trauma and PTSD, I want people to realize they're still there years later. They may not be as prevalent and painful for most of the time, but they're still there, just as if have a scab from being silly as a child, or if you fell walking down the street today and you scraped your knee, that scab will still be there years later.
We're talking about, I feel like many people don't want to talk about. Divorce is such a taboo topic, but it happens, and it actually happens at a higher rate than we really want to admit, especially within the warfighting community, or even if you look in the law enforcement community or the first responder community, especially where there's communities of such high levels of stress, right? And there's plenty of reasons as to why divorce can happen. But I'm curious, from your perspective as a man that has gone through it, what it's been like for you going through that process in terms of your support group, your friendships. Have they stayed? Did they go away? How have you been received? And, how that affected you in your rock bottom moments. Because I could tell you, my perspective as a woman, but just curious, how it's viewed from a lens of as a man.
So from my perspective, it was earth shattering. It changed my life across the board. The long term friends I had, I can say I don't have anymore, with the exception of about two of them. It's because even though divorce is ugly, usually those joint friends, while they try not to choose sides, eventually go towards one spouse or the other. And for me, it's my friend group went from a small group, because I'm my nature is an introvert, so usually my friend group is what I could count less on two hands. But it truly dwindled down to about two very close people, that and a lot of self-reflection. For me, it felt like a failure. I also did a lot of looking as a father. Around September of 2019, our entire lives changed as a family, and I did a lot of introspection. Okay, what can I do better as a father? Prior to all of that, I'd worked for a nice Fortune 500 company, and I was traveling about a week, 1 or 2 weeks a month, which is great because it helped grow my career. And I made sure I made all those, the major kid events, donuts with dad, the graduations. But as I started to self-reflect, I realized there was a lot that I still missed. There was those times of just sitting and laughing, and just being silly with the kids. Now, I'll wake up the kids by tickling their nose, or just something, or I'll just start randomly singing in the kitchen, and they just look at me and roll their eyes and go, "Really, Dad?" But it's that making those memories and just having those fun moments that I realized, in that retrospect, I wasn't present all the time. Emotionally and physically, I wasn't present. And it's also been rebuilding the relationships with my own children. There, of course, divorce is traumatic on them as well, and is part of it is for the parents to rebuild that relationship and to build a new relationship. And when it came to the personal life and the love life, it's taken me a lot of figuring out what type of partner I can be. And the biggest challenge right now is a lot of times my wonderful girlfriend will look at me and go, "Well, what would you like to do?" And my nature for years was, whatever you want, we're good. it was always to, look and say, hey, whatever you want, I'm good with it. Or if she puts on a wonderful dress and looks beautiful as can be, she goes, well, what do you think of this outfit? And it's like, well, does it make you happy? I used to always just turn the question and say, well, does it make you happy? And when she was truly looking for my opinion, and I was always slightly afraid to give my opinion. So like over the years, I've had to really reflect to go, okay, let me offer I'm in a safe space. I can offer my opinion without worrying of upsetting the other person. And for me, it was life changing. I have taken this time as a male to go, how can I be better as a father, as a partner, but also how can I be better in the community? And that's where I, realized, that conversation of, what's my legacy? And my legacy, as I've always said, my legacy are my children. How I raise them, the example they see from me and take, that's my legacy. And I kept looking, going, there's more there that we can do as a community to impact our community, whether it's local here in a city or whether it's in a region, to make that difference. And that's also what I've looked at, throughout this period.
I've had this conversation with other friends and particularly with my partner about going back into the dating scene and going back into the world of being somebody's partner and learning from your past mistakes. And part of that is being brutally honest with yourself and really sitting in that hard space of saying, these are the areas that I truly messed up in. Instead of shifting the blame and saying, that person did these things to me, and therefore that's the reason why it fell apart, but really sitting in the space of, these are the areas that I really messed up. Or these are the things that I do, or these are the parts of my personality that I need to really work on. And creating boundaries that make sense and what you're going to work through and tolerate through.
And you brought up a really good point, and that's where, one of the things I realized me as a partner had to do was the idea of communication. And it wasn't, and you can always have the gender conversation of, well, men can answer something in 10 words and women take 50 words, but a lot of times it was a very, when somebody asked me, well, what do you want in a partner? What do you want from your partner? My answer always was peace. I truly want peace. That's what I want in a relationship. Well, it took some very hard conversations and some fights with my current partner, which we all have, to realize there has to be more conversation that of not really setting boundaries, but setting clarification. Okay, what for you brings you that peace? And for some of it was self-discovery to figure out exactly what that was for me, because I didn't know. And it was that conversation of, how do I better communicate in a way that can be received in what I'm trying to say, versus just, if, when I'm at work and I type an email, I have learned that I type what I want to send, and then I go back and I add the nice stuff in the front. I add a little bit more color stuff in the middle. I make it a more rounded email instead of just straight to the point. I realized in my personal life, I need to do that. The same thing is, I need to have that emotional intelligence of, when I'm answering something, whether it's to my partner or to my children, is I'm addressing it in a way that is receptive to them, because I understand how they're thinking and what they're listening for, as opposed to saying, well, you think exactly like I do, so therefore we can communicate at the same level. And it's not how the relationships work.
Yeah, I'm sitting here smiling over something you just said. It's about communication, right? Getting to the point. And that is such the army side of me, right? Here's the task. I need to get to the end of it. I've got a lot of things to do, and it's nothing about not caring, but I often find myself, if I haven't talked to you for a while and I remember because I have such bad memory these days that I'm like, oh, I need to text so and so. And instead of say, hi, how are you? How's it going? And oh, by the way, here's the things I want to talk to you about. I just go straight into the, you know, the middle of the paragraph, if you will, with that person. And then I just always laugh at myself and I'm like, I wonder how they receive that, right? Do they truly know me that there goes Olivia? That's just the way she is. Or, or is it received as in, man, she's so rude? Because that's not what it is. In my head, I'm just like, oh, I just need to talk to this person. And away I go without doing the parts that you talk about where you have to scan your email and go, did I do the things like, hello, how are you? I hope your day is great, warmly. But communication is so important.
And that's the biggest challenge. And that's one thing, we talk about the idea of divorce and, how do we do that introspective and where we failed is, I looked at that as, not just in a partner relationship, but also with my children is, straight to that military style is, I was raised by a wonderful mother and a Marine. And for me, that was, you got your direction and, you went through it, and realizing my children haven't grown up around that mentality, I've had to, also realizing that communicating with them, it's more than just here's the action, go do your homework. It's okay. Well, what homework do you have? Do you, let's talk about, it's having that more descriptive conversation as opposed to simply giving out, actions or, direction. And, for me, it's, it's had to, I've had to evolve.
We started this conversation about a life-altering event, which is divorce. And I know for me, divorce left me at the bottom. And I've shared that in some podcasts. I've talked about it. And for me, it not only did it change my life, it left me shattered.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had to, what I felt like is rise to the top, and then I felt like I fell again, and then there's this rise, and then I feel like I'm falling again. And I talked about how I feel like most people ride a mini roller coaster where the peaks and the valleys are very small. Most people get to do that. But I feel like my life has been like these giant roller coasters that are at, Universal Studios, that are like these huge inclines and these huge declines. And I'm just curious as to, like I said, there's people that have gone through divorce and it's fine, right? They're just like, this is what I needed. This is where we're at. Good riddance. But for me, it took me out.
Mine took me out, but also what it did is it left a lot of new triggers. And if using the PTSD term, that I didn't have pre-divorce, and some I didn't know I had until about a year ago. Now my divorce finalized in 2022, but it wasn't until a year ago that all of a sudden my partner and I went to this beautiful little, studio type, Airbnb that had, the bottom floor was just, everything, the kitchen, living room, everything else was in the room, probably a little bigger probably than the room you're in right now. And then the bedroom was upstairs. And within it was, on the first floor though, the only light was a small little, maybe 3 inches by 7 inch window above the kitchen sink. And when I walked in there, we walked in there, I was all excited for this trip. I walked in, I literally felt the life and the energy like suck out of me. And my dog is my faithful companion and emotional support. Even though she's never gone through the training for it, but she has been there, from every moment. So I took her for a walk because she comes with us, and trying to kind of get my head back in the headspace. And I walked back into the place, and again, just kind of, it's like someone sucked the life out of me, and I couldn't figure it out. It was truly bothering me. And then I went, I sat by the fire pit, and I just cried. And my girlfriend looked at me and goes, are you okay? And I tried to explain to her because it wouldn't make sense to me. I was like, so we ended up leaving, coming back, and and then recently we went to a nice Airbnb down at Lake Anna, and it had a small little video studio. that, movie projector. But it was a very small room, no windows. And I walked in there and I was like, nope, I got to go. It was just, I just, my life, the gut, I was like, okay. And I didn't up until then, I mean, I have no issues with small spaces, but it was something about, and it was an event during the divorce proceedings where, I was in a very, small place and, with painted white, cinder block walls, and it was causing me flashbacks. It was like that. My body physically, flashed back to that time in the divorce. And, now I understand it, but that trigger, and you talk about divorce, I am sure there are sayings that somebody could say, or there is a place you might walk by that all of a sudden you feel that gut punch in your emotional side that, you could be at the top of the world, as happy as can be, and all of a sudden you literally feel at your lowest within seconds, and you're sitting there trying to rationalize yourself. Wait, what happened here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not just divorce. I think there's a lot of things that has happened within my life and my career that takes me back to certain moments, especially out of nowhere. But it- what I'm thankful for on the back end is that I am now in a place where I'm in a good relationship with my ex. We co-parent, and even through our divorce process, it wasn't. It was difficult because it wasn't something that I wanted, and it was hard. But when you sit back and you look through it and you look at it through a different lens, I recognize that divorce process wasn't necessarily as difficult as others may have gone through, right? There wasn't a lot of back and forth. There wasn't animosity. It was very business and it was transactional, but very business. But at the same token, he did try to work with me and I try to work with him. And I think that helped set the stage and the tone for the relationship that we have now, because we put our kids first. And for that, I'm grateful, because I know that not everybody gets to have that on the backside. But being able to survive, I think, just that alone, I was only able to do that because I was able to share that, right? And I think I found a way to vent and to grow by letting it out, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where a lot of people kind of knew my story. But for you, what was the turning point for you to be able to rise from this broken moment, from this unbreakableness, or to become unbreakable for you, I should say?
For me, it was twofold. One, after the divorce was finalized, and I started to kind of figure out what that rebuild was. With the kids living with me, and figuring out what my life's going to be with them, and how to juggle all those scheduling chaos that goes with being a parent. Love them, love playing dad Uber. But it's also the figuring out exactly what I needed. So part of what happened was twofold. The first one was one, the close friends I had who said, hey, continue doing what you're doing, because and that was supporting Gold Star families. That was something I loved doing as part of my government contracting life prior to CLVG, was supporting Gold Star families, where I had a fabulous opportunity of meeting and working with Woody Williams and his foundation to build Gold Star monuments across the United States. And I made great relationships there and supporting his foundation. And that was part of it, it's kind of supporting, say, okay, I need to give back. And the other half of that was having that realization that I needed to give more than just being a parent and going to work that 9-to-5 job. And by the way, if you believe it's a 9-to-5 job, you haven't worked government contracting or a government job in recently, because I've never heard of a work 9-to-5 in my life. But it's building that next opportunity of giving back. Is I realized for me throughout my divorce and through my background in government contracting, as well as on the supporting having friends throughout the Marine Corps, the Army, and the Air Force, and knowing their stories from when they were deployed, and the trauma and PTSD they carry with them, is I realized there was a need there for me to help support them. As I said, that challenge coin I carried up until that one day is, I ended up giving it to my oldest that day. But I realized that power of that challenge coin, or that symbol, that always reminded me to do something more. And that's kind of where about a little over 2 years ago, I said, you know what, I know what I need to do. I need to give back and help those who, when they're in those dark moments you talked about, or those low valleys, they're reminded you're not alone. Because a lot of times when we're in our lowest, we feel very alone. Even when we have our loved ones around us, we still feel very alone. And sometimes it takes a symbol, or just truly that loved one holding your hand and going, "Hey, you're not alone." And just literally using those words to help break through that mental barrier that you have.
You talk about being surrounded but still feeling very alone, and I think that is very, very true, especially in our military connected community. I think it's so easy to, especially in this day and age where we're connected socially on multiple social media platforms, to look at somebody's life and say, well, they're fine. They have everything going on, or they have enough friends that are going to check on them or to see if they're okay, or they don't need me. And I think that's a fallacy that needs to be broken apart.
You say that, and it's an interesting story. It makes me smile. Is and we'll talk about it a little bit more. But part of it is creating the challenge coin called the Coin of Resilience. But I met with a friend of mine who's retired sergeant major from the Guard, fabulous gentleman, dear friend, who I hadn't talked to in a while. And I want to sit down and talk about the nonprofit, talk about the Coin of Resilience. And I handed a coin, and I explained the purpose of the coin. And he looked at me, he goes, "Tim, you don't realize how much I needed this." He goes, this is, someday I will explain to you the background of this, but you don't realize right now how much I needed this. And it goes to exactly what you were saying, is even as we're talking to someone and they have this bright shine and this bright smile, is sometimes having that conversation, you realize it truly is what you see on the outside. There's a lot more struggle on the inside. And for me, on occasion, those reminders are helpful to realize that even though I know, hey, let's check on my friends, let's check on my battle buddies, through a phone call or a text, or going to do lunch. It's still sometimes you forget to do that check-in, because you're like, hey, last time I talked to them, they're on top of the world. And even though we know better, we get busy in our lives, and I'm not making excuses, but we drop the ball. And sometimes we need that reminder of, hey, pick up that phone, call those friends. And and that's, I actually wrote myself a note, so that way when I get busy, it's still on my wall to, hey, do your check-ins.
I want to further add to, I think, the check-ins in terms of a call to action. And because I like to do this, especially when people like to give pushback about giving of their time, giving of their money. It's always the whole, like, I don't have a lot of time to give, or I don't have a lot of money to give. And my pushback to that is, you don't have to have millions of dollars or thousands of dollars to give. But if you gave up, give up that one latte you're going to get, or that beer. So you're looking at $10. And if you and 5 of your buddies did that for 1 month, just so you're talking $110, 5 of your buddies, and you did that, and their friends did that, 5 of their friends, and you continuously did that exponential. That's how you make change. If everybody did that, right? And then of your time, it's sure, we all struggle with time. You can give us a 48 hour day and we would still say we don't have enough time. But it's, when are you going to break away, whether it's 10 minutes or 20 minutes or even just an hour within a month's time frame that you're going to commit to giving to something that matters to you. And we talk about mental health. And so in that vein of checking in on your buddy, it's not just saying, hey, I'm thinking of you and I'm checking on you. But I think people forget that we are people and we are human. And there are certain things about being human that we want to feel loved, valued, and a part of something, especially when we're veterans, right? Because that's one of the biggest reasons why we chose to serve. We wanted to be part of something bigger and better. So I think it doesn't hurt when you check in on somebody, just like, hey, not only am I checking in on you, I just thought I'd tell you something that I appreciate about you or that I have noticed about you lately. And I just wanted to say something nice, and how much that can make a world of difference. I know it does for me. The random messages that I get about the things that I'm doing that is helping them that I had no idea, the ones that come from left field of how something I said or something that I did has profoundly impacted that person. And those messages at the times that I get them have really been impactful for me, especially on the days that I'm at my lowest.
And you hit it right on the head. It's those random messages, and it's having those, even with your loved ones, is, leaving a random note in their wallet or in their purse that they may not find until 3 days later, but all of a sudden and it's that, just like that random text message, but it's reminding them of those positive feelings. And it's also the conversation of, you're from the veteran standpoint, a lot of times they have some very dark humor, and there's nothing wrong with that. And with one of my good friends is, sometime once a week, I will send one of the most ridiculously dark humor veteran, Instagram reel that I saw. The last one was, this gentleman typing up a non-judicial punishment, and some ridiculous thing that he's typing up this, Marine for. And of course, it's all humor, and I just sent it to him, and it's that laughter, it's that taking that moment of just, you ask how you got, how did I get through on divorce? Well, part of it is that dark humor is, there were things that I would just laugh at because they truly were so ridiculous that I could get stressed, I could get anxious, but you sit there and go, you can't make this up. And you just you just laugh at it for a moment, and it helps de-escalate some of that anxiety, some of that stress you're having. And then you're able to talk about it. And it's the same thing as sending that message to your friend of just something that just make them laugh. Or if they are if they are religious, is sending them a nice religious message, a quote. One my mentor, my friend, he sends out ones every week. It's a biblical verse, but then he puts his interpretation of it, which wraps around, and whether you're religious or not, you can understand where he's going with it. And that's how we help others. You talk about setting aside, an hour for those people in need. The other part of that, though, is you have to remember to do the same for yourself. And that's where a lot of people burn themselves out, myself included, is, you give, and, you forget to take a moment for yourself to take that 30 minutes, that hour to do something for yourself, whether it is, reading a book, whether it's, going to the gym. You take that moment for yourself just to let your soul and let your emotions breathe, and kind of let yourself recenter in whatever that activity is.
You talk about humor as a way for you to heal and to grow. And a very good friend of mine uses humor as therapy. In fact, her and I served together, and when she retired from the Army, that's what she got into. She loves humor and joke telling and storytelling through the format of telling jokes, and that's what she did. And so she has a company of being able to heal through laughter. Right? She studies it, and she's kicking butt. And her name is Robin Johnson, and she performs too. She's a comedian, so if you ever have the chance to catch one of her shows, and she talks about how important laughter is a source of medicine, especially when we talk about mental health. And you just talked about how that was important for you. Divorce changes people. It can leave you at rock bottom. For others, it can help change you into a better person if you're willing to go through it, and rise to the top. With that being said, what is the last thing that you want to leave my listeners in reference to your rock bottom moment and how you were able to come through it and become unbreakable?
So I want to leave two things, and the first one is a misconception, especially for men. Is for 2 years with my therapist, my therapist would look at me and go, "Tim, you have PTSD," and I look at her and go, "No, I don't." And we go back and forth, and then we agree to disagree, and this went on for about a good 2 years until finally I looked at her and said, I can't agree that I have PTSD. And I said, let me finish. I said, because as far as I'm concerned, I come from the military with my brother and my father. My entire career has been around the military. And I have, friends who, have been deployed, who, have lost, a body part, who have seen their buddies die, who are carrying this severe PTSD from being in uniform. I was like, I will never compare what I have or what I'm dealing with to things that they have seen. I said, but what I'll agree with is I have trauma. I said, yes, I agree that I am literally splitting a hair down the middle, but it took me, it's as far as I was concerned, one as a male, it's admitting a weakness, admitting a vulnerability, but also as a male who has never put on the uniform, whether it's first responder or in the military, is you can still have trauma, whether it's child loss, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's divorce, whether it's XYZ. You can still have trauma, and it's okay to admit that. It's not just a sliver of the population. It's a much larger portion of the population, and for males especially, it's getting past that Rambo mentality. And saying, you know what, it's okay to have that vulnerability in yourself and to admit it. Because once you admit it, then you can do something about it. And how I came out of it was creating, what I call the coin of resilience, which, is a challenge coin that, looks like this. It has that Spartan helmet and the Kraken. And the idea was to get these in the hand as an everyday carry. Whether it's, get them if you're fighting with trauma, you're fighting with PTSD, or if somebody is, giving them one. So that way they carry it in their wallet, they carry it in their purse, they carry it in the glove box, to allow them to have that reminder that when they're in those darkest moments, they see it, they see the Spartan helmet that remind them how the warrior ethos of being able to, fight the unwinnable battles, and that the octopus, which has those 8 tentacles of support, or there is, that levels of support, or if you call it your battle buddy, is, hey, you're not alone. Pick up the phone, call your friend, or do that self-care when in those weakest moments. And in creating this, for me, you go to, how did you get out of it, is by creating this coin of resilience, and now the nonprofit that is going to support it is, it's now being used by, Tennessee State Troopers as part of domestic violence calls. They give a teddy bear to the children, and after they go through the standard script, they give a coin to the survivor, and explain to them, hey, the Spartan helmet, this person, this warrior, that's you. You're surviving something that, and the person who did this is not your octopus, is not your support structure. And it's not that that coin's going to make a difference that moment, but what they've noticed is by having something that they walk away with instead of just the words, it's that visual symbol that brings that conversation back up in their head later on. And it's helping make that movement is, and handing it to, you talk about those moments that make you smile, handing it to a 98-year-old, World War II survivor who lives alone, no family around, and just putting on the hand, the first thing, the guy looks like, what's this for? Just to remind you you're not alone. And, after he looked at the coin, looked at the little card that comes with it, he started to cry. He goes, you don't know how badly I needed this. Because he's been carrying all that weight, all that trauma for so long, but he had nobody to talk to. And he truly felt alone. And for me, that's how I came out of it was, creating this mission to get these coins out to those who are battling their demons or who know somebody who is battling, to give it to them and say, hey, you're not alone.
I love that. I love what that represents, and I love the work that you're doing. Thanks for spending time with me, and thanks for being vulnerable and sharing your story, because I know that divorce is never an easy topic, especially when it's viewed as a taboo topic, and especially as a man. Oftentimes, men don't really want to talk about their divorce stories. And I feel like oftentimes I see women that are willing to share, because I think women are just more sharers in general. But thank you again for being vulnerable and sharing your rock bottom moments with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Keep rising, keep speaking your truth, and always remember you are the storm.